Moldova is pulling out of key agreements with the Russian-dominated Commonwealth of Independent States. The pro-Western government in Chisinau says it hopes at some point to leave the CIS altogether and follow a path towards joining the European Union. Is that just wishful thinking? And what could Moscow do to prevent it? Welcome to Roundtable. I'm Philip Hampshire. Moldova is pulling out of the CIS's Interparliamentary Assembly, and it's a serious sign of intent. It's the body that allows member states to cooperate with one another. The pro-European government of Moldova has been distancing itself from the organization for some time now, even more so since the war in Ukraine began. President Maia Sandu has never even attended a meeting since becoming leader. The CIS was formed after the collapse of the Soviet Union to help former member states work together, but now it's seen by many as a tool of Russian influence. So, will Moscow just sit by and watch Moldova move back towards the European Union? And does Brussels even want Moldova as a new member? So let's meet our guests. In London, we have Mary Dejevsky, who is a foreign affairs columnist at The Independent. Meanwhile, in Boston, over in Massachusetts, we have Dr. Dmitry Gorenberg, who is a senior research scientist at the Center for Naval Analysis. And in Tampa, in Florida, we have Dr. Tatsiana Kulakevich, who is a research fellow at the Institute for Russian, European, and Eurasian Studies at the University of South Florida. And in France, we have Dr. Anna Matvieva, who is a visiting senior fellow at King's College London. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. Mary, if I start off with you, how significant is this move by Moldova, do you think?
Well, I think it's very significant, obviously, from Moldova's perspective, because it institutes a change in Moldova's status and sort of sense of itself in that part of Europe. I think it's interesting as it were, a gradual and alternative route, which may be less conflicted compared with what happened between Ukraine and the European Union back in 2013, 2014. And of course, looked at from the East, it's the next stage in the dismantling of the Soviet Union. It's very easy to say it all ended in 1991, but it didn't. And the legacy of that still lingers.
Dmitry, do you think, how significant do you think this is for Moldova and for Russia?
Well, I think that this is kind of an initial move for Moldova. It is significant because they have had issues with internal stability, for example, and the possibility that Russia might exacerbate that. So I think it's certainly not as significant as Ukraine, but it is something that the Russian leadership is concerned about.
Anna, if I bring this across to you, do you think this is an important loss for the Russians? I mean, it's another loss of prestige at the same time while they're fighting in Ukraine. They've got issues going on in Armenia as well, where they've been somewhat less than fully able to keep up their peacekeeping obligations that they have in that country. So is Moldova just another little chip away at Russia's position in the world, or is it a bigger deal?
In terms of Russia's real interest, Moldova is pretty insignificant because it already has more or less kissed it goodbye in terms of that it will never be a very closely related country, like, for example, Belarus. It doesn't really have any military strategic significance. But in terms of a sense of Russian futility, Russia not having influence in the country, doesn't have political instruments, its allies, they are quite significant political forces within Moldova and especially in the breakaway region of Transnistria, who are more sympathetic towards Russia. So in that sense, Russia cannot really help their allies. So in that sense, it is a little bit of a repetition of early Ukraine scenario, because there have been quite a lot of forces sympathetic towards Russia and Russians within Ukraine, but Moscow was not able to kind of capitalize on that assets. So in that sense, in terms of kind of political futility, it has that kind of demonstration effect. It is unpleasant. The statements coming from Chisinau are sort of a blow to Russian prestige in a way, but in the clear light of the day, it doesn't really change anything much for Moscow.
Tatiana, are you in agreement with all of that?
Well, I would say that this gesture is a symbolic move more than a real move, because it's not a real separation from the CIS, and it's just a declaration. A few laws were suspended, but it's not a separation, as I say. And I would say it is actually important to Russia, Russia just cannot reach it directly, because this plan of Russia's to occupy Ukraine and control Ukraine failed. But Russia has a significant influence in Moldova, I would say, in disagreement to other speakers, because Moldova has local elections coming up in the fall 2023. And we already see the Gagauz region of Moldova already had pro-Russian local candidates elected there. So internally, Russia is making its moves and only is stopped by Ukraine in this regard, I would say.
So Tatiana, do you think that Moldova, if you like, is looking at this and thinking, this is a good time for us to try and distance ourselves from Russia simply because Russia's occupied in Ukraine, it's busy elsewhere?
I would say that's exactly what happens. And the same is with the protests that are happening, have been organized, or were organized 2 days ago or 3 days ago. Also demonstrations that by the president that Moldova wants to choose the European Union path, but it does not eliminate a lot of internal problems inside Moldova, and it's going to be difficult for Moldova to kind of reach the EU, status unless all these, reforms are actually happening. Currently, inflation is very high. The moves are being made, but it's not going to be that easy.
Anna, you look to be shaking your head there. You're not in agreement with all of that.
Well, I'm partly in agreement with Tatiana, where I think I disagree. I think that, yes, Russia has constituency in Moldova, but it's also very obvious that despite numerical strength, it is really paralyzed into inaction. Nothing which they can do can decisively alter the course of Moldova's politics, its trajectory. There is a position to withdraw, to the idea of withdrawal from the CIS, but despite protests, despite pronouncement, it cannot really do anything. Pro-Russian constituency is losing media space. More and more TV channels, broadcast channels are being closed. There have been sanctions on opposition politicians. Some of them have been detained. There have been also bans of various rallies. Individuals have been intimidated. And it doesn't seem that there is anything which Russia can do to help their quite considerable amount of allies.
Mary, does that mean that the CIS is in many ways, is it dead now? I mean, we've had Georgia pulled out in 2008. 2014, the Ukrainians obviously got extremely upset with the Russians, so they pulled out of their cooperation with the CIS. Moldova now looks to be pulling out of it as well. Is the CIS gone?
I don't think it's completely gone. I think it's changing its shape, and I think it's moving east to the extent that it's going to survive. One of the reasons it's still alive is because of energy routes, pipelines, trade. It's surprising maybe that even so many years after 1991, so many of these trade links with Russia remain. And I also think that you've still got pretty much all, I think 4 out of 5 of the Central Asian countries are in the CIS. So to that extent, they are going to have a louder voice, and it may start to change its character if it's going to survive.
Would you agree with that, Dimitri?
Yeah, I would just say that we shouldn't prematurely declare that CIS dead, or even that Moldova is withdrawing. With Moldova's not announced that it's withdrawing, it's taking some steps to reduce its connections for sure, but that's a long way from actual withdrawal. So I think that there have been a lot of times in the past when CIS was kind of declared dead, and it hasn't happened. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Much more likely is that there'll be there'll be some reevaluation, as Mary said, and even on the Russian side, the Russian side may not be as eager to maintain those connections down the road as it has been. There's certainly a constituency within Russia that thinks that other countries are getting benefits out of Russia through the CIS while criticizing its foreign policy, for example, and that's something that they dislike.
Anna, are you on board with that?
I would add one dimension to it. Moldova's bid to declare its intention to leave the CIS is intimately related to its bid to join the EU, and the fact that last year, 2022, Moldova has acquired candidacy status within the European Union. They moved to disentangle from the CIS, at least politically. Is something which the current Moldovan leadership hopes would be able to advance its bid to join the EU. How that bid would progress, we, of course, have to see, but we can probably assume now that this bid is very much related to how quickly Ukraine is going to become the member of the EU, and would it ever become? Because it is inconceivable that Moldova would be the first country to join the EU and Ukraine would not. So in that sense, the progress on the EU path is also kind of backfires on the CIS path. So Moldova may risk falling through the cracks.
Can Moldova legitimately join or even begin? I realise that it's already on the slow escalator towards the European Union, but as many countries have found out, that process can take 20 or 30 years. So is Moldova legitimately on the escalator towards the European Union, or is the European Union just going to keep looking at it and saying, Transnistria, it's a problem. You can't come into the European Union until you've sorted out Transnistria. Mary, let me put that to you.
Well, I think Transnistria can be used as an excuse, if you like, but it wouldn't be, you look at Cyprus, you look even at the UK with Northern Ireland when they joined the European Union. So that's not an absolute fatal disqualification. I think that Moldova's economy, the state of justice, the courts, all those sort of things, those are maybe a bigger problem, and something that will be that is something that the EU will be looking at more closely. But I'd also like to go back to almost the first point that I made. I think it's quite interesting that the EU seems to have learnt something from what I would regard as its mistakes in 2013-2014. In dealing with Ukraine, because then Ukraine was being offered something that wasn't a candidate membership of the European Union, but it was being treated as a yes, no, all or nothing, east or west, absolute sort of ultimatum choice. And I think EU is approaching Moldova and its candidacy much more carefully. And maybe that's partly a reflection of what happened with Ukraine.
Well, Tatiana, I'm going to take this across to you in a second. But first of all, I mean, most viewers at home will be familiar with the European Union and what it offers for its member states. It's been debated fairly widely around the world, but they might not be quite so familiar with what is involved with being a member of the Commonwealth of Independent States. It was formed in 1991 after the Soviet Union collapsed. The members at the present are Azerbaijan, Armenia, Belarus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Ukraine. Nominally, although Ukraine is more or less pulled out, it's still listed as a founder member. It aims to streamline relations and policy between members. It covers economic and cultural and political ties, and allegedly deals with human rights and security issues. Tatiana, are they leaving anything that is not worth leaving if they're heading towards the European Union? Is there actually an option between the two of these, or is it pretty clear which way to go?
Well, I would say it's pretty clear which way to go, considering that CIS is more about a formality here than actually a functioning body, more for, Russian image, because for Moldova, the CIS has not been functioning. They are declaring that it has been dead. Some of the delegates from Moldova have not been participating in, actually not doing anything as a part of CIS. That's why that was one of the explanations why they are terminating some of the agreements with CIS without actually leaving it immediately. Politically saying, the other members will actually stay for a moment in CIS. It's not going to collapse. I agree with other speakers in this term. But as a functioning body, some of them and many of these countries are, they have to stay inside the CIS. And in terms of the European Union, I would say Transnistria is leaning towards the European Union. More than 70% of the trade of Transnistria is actually with the European Union lately. So economically, if Moldova recovers and improves, meeting the requirement of the EU to become a member, then Transnistria should not become a big problem after Ukraine wins, especially.
Dmitry, what does this mean? We talked about what this means for Moldova and for the Russians. What does it mean for Transnistria, though? This is a breakaway area that has had more or less de facto autonomy for getting on for a decade now. What happens in that area?
Well, I think that Transnistria will kind of continue as it is. I'm not sure this particular move has much of an impact. I want to add one thing, though, in terms of the impact of Moldova, because there is one benefit that it derives. It's not from the CIS as such, but from its relationship with Russia. That's kind of part of that, and that's the number of Moldovans who are working in Russia. And there have been some threats made on the Russian side to send those people back if Moldova is judged too hostile, and that could have a serious impact on the Moldovan economy and therefore on Moldovan politics. So I think that that's something that Russia can potentially use as a kind of a stick to prevent Moldova from becoming too detached, let's say, from Russian orbit.
Anna, let me bring this across to you. What would you expect to see Transnistria do if Moldova continues its gradual drift away from Russia?
It's going to be difficult because firstly, Moldovan exports are going mostly to the EU. The rest of Moldova exports its produce mostly to the CIS countries, so it's kind of reverse flow. So how they are going to deal with that option, that's quite unclear. Then there are also Russian energy supplies because now Russia supplies both Transnistria and the rest of Moldova with different prices. There are different formulas, but if that kind of supplies would hold everywhere, it's very difficult to turn the tap in one place and not to turn the tap in another place. So it's most probably that Transnistria would suffer economically. Also, remember there are no direct links between Transnistria and Russia. The links existed over land, and while Ukraine, that's not possible. So yes, they do have a cause to worry. The only kind of glimpse of hope that the Moldovan leadership is not really picking up the fight with Tiraspol right now, but their policy might change. I would like also to add about CIS. Yeah, it has two sides to it. One is that it was founded as a mechanism for civilized divorce. So it had that kind of political aim. And that aim, you can argue, has not been really successfully achieved. That's why we see all these wars, conflicts, and the bad relations, and all sorts of aggravations. But also it has an economic and social side to it. For example, Moldova has signed 330 treaties within CIS. So in order to leave the Union, it will have to denounce all of these treaties and negotiate bilateral agreements with each CIS member. So far, Chisinau authorities denounced only two of them, one on borders, which is perfectly understandable. It doesn't have any common borders with CIS states, and the other is on media, which is more provocative political statement. All sorts of other treaties are regulating trade, social relations, labor movement, remain intact, and we will see whether Moldova's authority would be in any hurry to denounce them.
Well, you mentioned there the political issues. Let me bring in some politics here. I've got a clip here from the president, former prime minister of Moldova, Maia Sandu. She had this to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, our democracy is backed up by strong political will, but it cannot stand alone against the magnitude of the challenges we are currently facing. Russia will continue to be a source of instability for the region for years to come. Our best way to consolidate our democracy and freedom is to join the European Union.
Mary, that sounds pretty much like the death of the CIS, at least as far as Moldova is concerned, that they're leaving.
Well, yes, I think as far as as far as Moldova is concerned, as far as the rest of the CIS, I mean, I think that's an open question. But I think Moldova maybe faces a few more problems than Maia Sandu is implying, that it's really a straight course and that it all depends on Moldova. But I think when you look at, as I said, at the economy and at social institutions, judicial institutions in Moldova, then there's quite a long way to go. But also, I think you have to reckon with, and she has to reckon with, the fact that at the moment, so far as I can see from the opinion polls and the parties, opinion in Moldova is quite evenly balanced as to whether ties with Russia should be continued on current levels, or whether Moldova should turn so categorically towards the European Union. And I think maybe those are, on the one hand, that is domestic politics. On the other hand, it's very easy for the pro-EU groups to blame Russia, to use Russia as a scapegoat for opposition inside Moldova. And I think that's quite a dangerous thing to do.
Tatiana, what did you make of Maia Sandu's comments?
I would say that we need to look at Moldova as having a big potential and interest in joining the European Union, and symbolizing their interest in joining the European Union supporting Moldova's move towards the West. And considering if Ukraine wins, they have even more chances. At the same time, there are still a lot of internal problems, and Russia, it continues trying to influence Moldova's internal politics with these local elections upcoming, oligarchs in Transnistria operating, and oligarchs even from outside. The Shor oligarch in Israel, he is still, and his party are still active in Moldova. So Transnistria has a chance to not be a problem for the European Union membership, because they trade with European Union, and Moldova actually decided already and made a move to diversify the gas imports. They are doing that not from Russia only, they are doing it from Romania. So it remains to see what happens, but a lot of positive signs, same as with Ukrainian counteroffensive, that I would say. So let's hope for the best.
Tatiana, Mary, Dmitry, Anna, thank you very much, all four of you, for joining me today. I'm afraid that's all we have time for, though. You can find more discussion and debate if you head on over to our YouTube channel. Just go there and search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me here and the entire team, thank you for watching, and goodbye.